New nomenclature and livery for McLaren in 2017, MCL 32. Not quite sure still whether that stands for McLaren Cars Limited or McLR, but anyway, we'll leave that one. And of course, going back to orange, but not going back to orange as we saw Fernando Alonso racing in Indianapolis in a car that looked fabulous, but with a mixture of orange and black, which, anyway, we won't go any further with that one. Difficult year for them. Signs on the horizon in Hungary just before the season break that things were starting to pick up. Fernando Alonso even set fastest lap in the Hungarian Grand Prix, but a difficult 2017, given that at the end of 2016, they appeared to be kind of on the rise a bit, Scarbs. They'd found a bit of reliability, they found a bit of pace, but then it fell away. They've had a really difficult time, haven't they?
This was it. I mean, I think the back end of last year was all predicting a very good year for McLaren, with Honda being able to rebuild the engine without the token system, with McLaren starting to find their aero philosophy working. That all seemed to fall apart over the winter, and certainly through the year we've seen another year of rebuilding for both Honda and McLaren to get back up to pace. Hungary is never a great barometer of performance, particularly when you've got a down on power engine. You're always going to look very much stronger at that sort of circuit, but we've got some very tricky races coming up for them. But you can see, again, you know, through the year they're getting these problems solved. You know, the reliability in Hungary was so much better, the performance was so much better, you know, despite that circuit. So, you know, we've got a degree of optimism for the team again there.
So the car, they've never stopped churning out stuff at McLaren, have they? Massive facilities, massive workforce, engineering team, and the rest of it. And so they're constantly producing new bits.
Absolutely.
And I got to say here, I have to beat my own drum again, which is that Honda need to be managed by the racing team with which they are a partner. And I can't reiterate that enough. And I don't think that's the way it's ever worked at McLaren. I think it's been Honda there and McLaren here. They send the engines to McLaren, McLaren build the car, and they go racing. And the way it has to work is that there needs to be a lot more cooperation between the two, and McLaren need to have their own engine department running Honda, if you see what I mean. In the same way that Paddy Lowe at Mercedes worked very closely with Andy Cowell on the other side of the fence. So that isn't happening yet at McLaren-Honda, but it may well do in the future. We don't know where they're going to go with engines yet. There's lots of talk that they may well switch to Renault even from Honda. Well, hard to believe that you would leave. Well, let's not go down that path at the moment, Scarbs. It's so easy to get sidetracked with McLaren. Let's talk about the car and some of the updates we've seen. Looking at it there, high rake. They've really got to that high rake philosophy introduced initially by Red Bull, and quite a short wheelbase car too, even by Ferrari standards. Yeah,
I mean, in F1 terms, it's a short wheelbase, maybe not as short as a couple of the cars out there. But again, high rake, and you know, they're now starting to get all of this sort of philosophy working. Takes a lot of work to get a high rake car set up. You've got the suspension, which obviously has changed with the regulations this year, and then the detail of the aero around the back of the car, which we can sort of now start to spin around and have a look at. The main thing is that you can see.
What spec is this? What we're looking at?
This was the Baku spec. So this was one of the first of their sort of big updates. Things like here, like the floor slots. Now, with high rake, you've got much more of the tyre exposed underneath the car, which means the air hits that and wants to go into the diffuser and wreck the diffuser performance. So teams had these slots in the floors to try and offset that air spilling off the tyre, and that then allows this high rake setup to start to work, start to make sense. And it's all about creating this, what we call a vortex around the inside of the diffuser. If we spin around and have a look at the diffuser, we can see how clever McLaren have started to get in this area. Actually, something that's been copied now by a few other teams. Rather than the wall of the diffuser just ending, they've actually added this fin here to the end, which just grabs the air that's spinning up the inside wall of the diffuser, spins it even further, and that pulls more air under the floor, creates more downforce for almost no drag. So this sort of area is a real key area for teams to work with, particularly with the high rake cars, because you've really got to manage how all the air is going around that massive rear tyre that they're running this year.
What do you think of McLaren in terms of how it is on a fast circuit? Put aside the engine problem, how good a car is it on a fast corner, do you think, compared with, say, a Mercedes?
It's not at Mercedes level, it's not at Ferrari's level. I think it is inherently probably quite a good car. But when you've got a down on power engine, you have to remember that you have to start to take wing out of the car in order to get your straight line speed. So you're trading downforce for certain parts of the circuit where you potentially could go faster, but the payoff being so slow down the straights is so much worse that you have to trade all of these areas off. Until you've got a really strong engine in there, we'll never really know how good that chassis is, because as much as McLaren and media can point at corner speeds and sector timings, until everything else is equal, it's very hard to balance these out.
Is there a pattern to the problems Honda have been having in this first half of the year?
Yeah, it's all been focused on the MGUH, which is the hybrid system, a motor, a generator that's mounted to the turbocharger. So it's spinning at 125,000 RPM.
H for heat, right?
H for heat, yes. Although it doesn't actually work on heat, it still works on kinetic energy, but just to separate it from the the KERS style energy recovery system. And this has always been a very hard part to engineer. And I think Honda have now got to the point where they've got this worked out. So they've got the turbo.
But why is it so difficult compared with ours?
Because you've got
with KERS.
Well, because
KERS.
So this is ERSH.
Yes.
And then you've got ERSK, which is the old KERS, which is what we all kind of understand. The problem
why is it so complicated?
The two key reasons. One is it's mounted deep inside the V of the engine, so it gets very hot. It's in very close proximity to the turbocharger, which means the exhaust, things get very hot. And then just the speed it runs at. So the K motor generator runs at about a third of the engine speed, so it's much, much slower, 5,000 RPM, something like this. Whereas the one that's mounted directly to the turbo, as I said, spins it up to 125,000 RPM. Probably around a lap, never less than 100,000 RPM it's spinning at. So when you've got that mix of high rotational speed, lots of electricity cycling through it, and a hot environment, it's very hard to make the insulation and the bearings and the cooling all work.
But did any of the other manufacturers have a similar problem for a short period of time?
Yeah, I mean, Renault had issues. Ferrari initially had issues.
But how long did the Ferrari issue last?
Well, we knew Ferrari got their engine worked out within a year, so their second generation engine in 2015 had got all of that worked out.
And did they move it? Is that how they solved the problem?
No, they still have theirs in the same relative position. And to be honest, all of them, the K, sorry, not the K, the H, I'm getting myself confused, all sits within the V of the engine. It's the natural place for it to sit.
Right.
But
when I say move it, I meant even slightly, just to try to improve heat.
Because we've never really been able to get clear sight of exactly where they're mounted. You're never entirely sure. But, it's all about managing the cooling and then the bearings and the casings. And Honda just really struggled with this one. I think the rest of the engine now is probably up on a par. So I think now that they've got those reliability issues and they can start to push the vibration issues from the early season have been solved with a new V6 engine. So they should now start, theoretically, to make progress. But we said this at the end of last year, so you're never entirely sure where Honda are going to go with things.
The boys at McLaren and girls have had, I don't know how many engine changes this year. It's just endless for them. But occasionally, when you bump into a mechanic, because they're not allowed to talk, but you say, what was the problem? Sometimes it's things like, fuel leak, and things that you think, wow, that's pretty amazingly back to the old days again. I mean, there's a lot of things on that car that seem to go wrong from the outside looking in. It's difficult to say that without really knowing exactly. But what's your impression?
So I think the problem they had, particularly through testing in the first half of the year, is that the engine was vibrating. That has issues. It means that you can't run the engine to its full capacity because obviously the vibrations will get worse. So they were down on power because they had to detune the engine. But then all these other assemblies, and you know what these engines are like, there's pipes and tubes and fittings all over the engine.
Vibration is the worst thing you can have,
is just breaking things. And again, as we've said lots of times in the past, and as Hasegawa at Honda has said himself, the engine goes from the dyno in Japan to being fitted in the car for free practice, and it doesn't go on one of these full car rigs where you have a complete car that's being bounced up and down.
Why haven't McLaren set all that up? That's been exactly my point from day one. Why don't they have that?
Renault and Red Bull did this when they were having their issues. That resolved these kind of installation problems that they were having and caused lots of the grief that the team
What are those rigs called again? They've got a specific... the one that Red Bull bought and then denied that they bought it. It's a system, so expensive.
It's a system made by AVL, and they call it, I think, MSL, but it's what most people call it a virtual test track.
Right.
So it's somewhere between an engine dyno and a 7-poster rig.
You would have thought that's what McLaren would have set up from day one, near Milton Keynes, where Honda have a base anyway because of the BTCC thing, or at Woking or wherever.
There should be one at both
factories. And there should have been one from day
and
one. That's,
part of the process
tells a lot, doesn't it?
From going from dyno to track has to be proving the complete assembly, or else you're just wasting time in testing. As we saw, testing, they used more than an engine a day because it's quicker to change an
McLaren
engine.
do have a beautiful factory with a wonderful pond and a lovely boulevard.
They have
lots
space.
Of restaurants.
Yeah, they could drain the pond and put one in there perhaps.
Being slightly supercilious, but I know under the new management there, things will probably turn around. And that's probably what they've got to look at, isn't it? They've got to look at something as structurally logical as that to get the engine to be running without vibration. Let's focus on this and get it going. And
well, if you think you've got the Honda engine now, 2021, there'll be new engines, and that will all need to be proven in the chassis. So, you know, the investment needs to be made now. It's got a long lead time to get one of these installed in a factory. So, you know, again, a critical area for McLaren's.
But Honda's still a huge company that none of us should discount or in any way disrespect.
I think we have to remember when Honda were going to come in 2015, everyone was crying foul because they'd had an extra year and Honda make fantastic engines.
And they were doing exclusively for McLaren.
And exclusively for McLaren. Everyone thought this was going to be, you know, complete Honda dominance.
Yeah.
Honda have the ability still to do that. If they can get these problems sorted out, they can have an engine that can beat everyone else on the grid. There's no question of it.
So there you have it. Honda's problem solved. All you need is that decent virtual test rig. Continue to work on the MGUH. Deal done.